George Lawson's commentary on the life of Joseph. Joseph is falsely accused by his mistress and cast into prison. Joseph in Potiphar's house. Genesis 39:10-23. And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her, to lie with her, or to be with her. It is not enough for us to resist 1 or 2 or 20 temptations to any sin. We ought to continue steadfast and unmoved amidst all the terrors and all the allurements that are spread out before our eyes. God is ever the same, his love is ever the same, and our duty is ever the same, whatever Satan may suggest, whatever bad men may say to us, and whatever corrupt motions we may feel in our own spirits. Samson refused for a long time to satisfy Delilah's insidious questions concerning his great strength. But at last a mighty man was conquered by the tears and importunities of a fair woman. He revealed a fatal secret, and his indiscretion cost him his eyes and his life. Thus sinners startled at the first proposal of a temptation. They refuse for a time to comply with the great enemy of their souls. But at last, tired of resistance, they yield to the destroyer, and bring that guilt and misery upon themselves which the devil, with all his wiles, could not have brought upon them without their own consent. They forget the important words of our Lord, "He that endures to the end, the same shall be saved. And he that overcomes and keeps my works to the end, to him will I give power over the nations." Joseph was a good soldier of that God whom he served. He was far from yielding to the most insinuating and the most urgent temptations. And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her, to lie with her, or to be with her. He regarded neither her caresses nor her frowns, her threatenings nor her promises. None of her arts could induce him to do that great wickedness to which she solicited him, and to sin against God. If she could have given him all the treasures of Egypt as the price of his virtue, he would have despised them. She might threaten him with death, but he knew that the God whom he served was able to save him from her power and her wiles. And besides, 1,000 deaths were less dreadful to him than the loss of his innocence, and the loss of that divine favor which had hitherto moderated and sweetened all his distresses. "Count it all joy," says James, "when you fall into divers temptations." But the temptations of which James speaks were of a different kind from those by which Joseph was assaulted. When we meet with frequent solicitations to a sweet or profitable sin, we have great reason to be alarmed. But let us take to ourselves a whole armor of God, and we shall be able to stand in the evil day. In this armor Joseph was arrayed, and he was a glorious conqueror. In 1,000 assaults he remained unhurt, for he was supported by the mighty power of God. Let young men learn from him how they may escape the edge of that sharp sword, the mouth of a strange woman, the flattery of the tongue of a strange woman. And let us all learn how to keep our ground when we are assaulted by the fiery darts of the wicked one. Verses 11-15. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of this house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand, and fled, and got him out. And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house, and spake unto them, saying, "See, he is brought in an Hebrew unto us, to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me, and fled, and got him out." Secrecy is favorable to temptation. There was a day after Joseph had resisted many assaults of his mistress, that he happened in the course of his business to be alone with her in the house. She did not allow this opportunity to pass neglected. She did not consider, perhaps she did not know, that the eye of God was upon her. No human eye saw her but those of Joseph, and now she thought that she might almost compel him to gratify her licentious desires. What an indignity in this to the Most High, that men and women will venture to do those things in his presence which they would not venture to do before the eyes of the meanest of their fellow creatures. Are we more afraid of the eyes of our own servants or of our own children than of those eyes which behold the hearts and try the reins of the children of men, to give to every one according to his ways and according to the fruit of his doings? Joseph's mistress saw that words were vain. She now takes another way of dealing with him. She caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." How dreadfully was her heart hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. How odious does such a woman make herself. Beware of giving way in any degree to the allurements of sin, lest it obtain a complete dominion over you. Beware of rejecting admonitions, lest God punish you with judicial hardness of heart. Many remonstrances had been disregarded by Potiphar's wife. The bright example of Joseph's virtue had no other effect but to inflame her licentious desires. And now behold what a vile woman she has become. Is she ashamed of her abominable desires? No, she is not at all ashamed, neither can she blush. Joseph is now in a critical situation. By his superior strength or swiftness, it was possible for him to escape from the presence of the wicked woman. But how will it be possible for him to escape the effects of her fierce resentment? Joseph at this time did not think of her resentment. More important cares engrossed his mind. Her presence was more abhorred by him than death in any of its forms. He left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. The danger incurred by leaving his garment in her hands was very obvious. Her resentment might improve it as the instrument of his destruction. Or if she endeavored, for her own sake, to conceal it, an accident might very probably discover it, and raise cruel suspicions against him. But Joseph acted upon this principle, that of two evils the least is to be chosen, and that sin is an infinitely worse evil than disgrace or death. Joseph flies that he might be a conqueror. Flee youthful lusts, says the apostle, and again he says, abstain from all appearance of evil. Avoid the tempter's house, says a wise man. Pass not by it, turn from it and pass away. We cannot keep ourselves too far from an evil matter. Those who have manfully resisted temptation at one time have, through watchfulness or self-confidence, fallen at another time. But happy is a man that fears always, and that flees to the utmost distance from the place of danger. Potiphar's wife was grievously disappointed when she found Joseph so resolute against complying with her wicked solicitations. She had long awaited and used all means, and she now saw that all the means she could use were vain. How then does she behave? Hope defeated makes her heart sick, not with dejection, but with wrath. Her love was turned into the blackest hatred. She could not ruin Joseph's soul, but she will, if possible, ruin his body, and will spare no lies nor hypocrisy to attain her purpose. Joseph himself, in his haste to get away, had furnished her with the means, and her genius is fruitful in expedients to improve them. She first called her servants and made bitter complaints of the young Hebrew servant, as if her lord had intended to affront her by bringing him into the house. And in proof of what she said, she showed Joseph's garment, which she pretended he had left in her hands, that he might run and escape detection in an attempt upon her honor. By her own account, Joseph was a monster of wickedness, and herself a pattern of purity. What shall be done unto thee, or what shall be given thee, O deceitful tongue, burning coals of juniper, sharp arrows of the mighty? If we were amazed in reading the foregoing part of the history, to find this woman so brazen-faced, we are now astonished at her infernal artifices. She was as wise to do evil as if the old serpent had brought her all his lying arts and deceivableness of unrighteousness. She scrupled at nothing that was wicked. She not only dissembles and lies, but she plots the destruction of the best of men, for no other reason but his incomparable virtues. Murder was in her heart and tongue. She now becomes as wicked as Satan could make her, the enemy of all righteousness, a miserable slave to the devil, who carried her captive at his pleasure. No depth of wickedness is too shocking for those who are lost to shame and left in the power of their own lusts. Verses 16 to 18. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. Potiphar's wicked wife drew her husband by her vile arts into a partnership of her guilt by her lying speeches. She represented the matter to him in such a light that he might think himself bound by the laws of marriage to inflict the most exemplary punishment upon his poor servant. The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in unto me to mock, or to insult me. She seemed too modest to speak in plain terms of Joseph's crime, but she does not leave any room to doubt of the nature of the insult. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. The accusations at first view might seem to be proved beyond a doubt by the garment which was found in the house, for she had laid it up to be showed to her Lord when he came home. Believe not every word that is spoken, for there are many liars, many artful deceivers in the world. If a man must be held guilty because some circumstances seem to establish the charges brought against him, what innocence would be safe? Jesus Christ himself must have been justly condemned, for if he did not speak the very words produced by the witnesses that bear testimony against him, he spake words that had almost the same sound. And it is very probable that Naboth had spoken words that might be, with great plausibility, twisted into blasphemy against God and the king. Yet his death was severely avenged upon the house of Ahab. Verses 19 and 20. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. A sagacious and penetrating mind may often detect the vile arts of deceivers, and discern the truth through the mist by which their dissimulation covers it. The story of Potiphar's wife might well have been suspected. Joseph was not likely to have left his garment in the hands of his mistress to be a witness against him if he had really insulted her. His strength was superior to hers. Otherwise, it is not probable that he would have thought of the insult which was pretended to be given her, and therefore no good account but the true one could be reasonably believed concerning the garment which was found in the house. The first appearances, however, were against Joseph. If he had told his own story, it is not likely he would have gained credit. Who could have believed that a young man would exhibit such a rare instance of virtue? His own testimony would be insufficient to procure a belief from Potiphar, and it would be almost impossible for him to believe that his own wife was so utterly abandoned as her behavior showed her to be. When the truth was known, an indifferent person might perhaps have pronounced sentence on the whole in Joseph's favor. But Potiphar was partial, and his wife's complaints raised a storm of passion in his breast, which would render him incapable of hearing truth and reason. If you would behave like rational creatures, let not anger run away with your judgment. Nothing more effectually blinds the mind. It is a short madness, and the judgment which we form of persons and things under its influence ought to be reversed when we come to ourselves. Wrath is cruel, and anger is outrageous. Joseph exposed himself by his unconquerable virtue to the fierce wrath of his mistress, and his pretended crime exposed him to the wrath of his master, which would have proved fatal to him if God's eye had not been upon him for good. Potiphar paid too much deference to his wife. He ought not to have believed her word against Joseph without examining into the truth of them. A man ought to love his wife as a part of himself, but however dear she may be to him, truth and justice ought to be still dearer. We are not acting dutifully when our deference to one class of relations makes us unjust to relations of another class. Men ought to love their wives above their servants, but their fondness for their wives ought not to make them unjust to their servants by adopting without examination every quarrel of their mistress. Our tenderest and most amiable affections must be kept within the bounds of reason and religion, that we may act like honest men. Does our law judge any man before it hear him? Said a Jewish ruler to the enemies of Jesus. Justice says the same thing, and yet we find nothing more common among men than judging their neighbors without hearing them. We may very warrantably condemn Potiphar's injustice in dooming Joseph to a prison without a fair trial, but let us beware lest in condemning Potiphar we condemn ourselves. We have indeed no prisons that command for those men against whom we may conceive a causeless resentment. But is it not manifest injustice to do what lies in our power to deprive them of their good name, when, for aught we know, our displeasure against them originates in ignorance and error? Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. The situation was sufficiently dreary for a young man who had been so much caressed in his father's house. But we are further told by a writer who could not be mistaken that he was laid in irons and that his feet were hurt with fetters. We cannot but sympathize with Joseph, whose virtues were so transcendent, and who was so ill rewarded by the man to whom he had been so inviolably faithful. What, then, shall we think of the treatment which our Lord received from a people whom he came to save? Upon a false accusation, the great pattern of all virtue was cast into the prison of the grave, after he had been made to endure such ignominy and such pain as were never allotted to freemen of Rome for the blackest crimes. But why did not Joseph represent his own innocence and obtain a milder sentence? It does not appear that he said anything in his own defense, and it would have been to no purpose to have pleaded his own cause before a tribunal so prejudiced as that where he was judged. Christ himself at his trial before the chief priest, before Herod, and before Pilate said nothing, except when he saw that to speak might tend to a good end. But if Joseph was deemed guilty of an attempt so audacious upon his mistress, why did his master, who had so much power in his hands, satisfy himself with the punishment of imprisonment? We know that jealousy is a rage of a man, and that he will not spare in the day of vengeance. But we know also that jealousy and every other passion is under the control of the Most High, who mightily restrains them, so that they cannot interfere with his counsels and binds him into a compliance with the divine purposes of his will. Potiphar's former love to Joseph might at this time operate upon his mind and prevent his rage from inflicting death on Joseph. Or perhaps he might entertain some faint doubts of his wife's veracity. But whatever motives hindered him from proceeding to extremities, it is certain that he was under the overruling influence of God, whose set time for Joseph's dissolution was not yet come. He had much to do in this world before he obtained his dismission to another. He was to become the shepherd and the stone of Israel. He was to become the father of two mighty tribes in Israel. He was to be the Lord of Pharaoh's house, according to the dreams which came to him from heaven. He was to see good and glorious days on earth, and he will not perish whilst the promises which he received from above were yet unaccomplished. All the devils of hell combining their powers would find themselves unable to put one of God's servants to death, whilst any part of their work on earth remains unperformed. It was not Joseph's death, but his imprisonment, that was to be the means of his elevation. And Potiphar, and even Potiphar's wife, served Providence in all the evil which they did to Joseph. Whilst they were most egregiously violating his commandments, they were fulfilling his counsels. Let not God's people be afraid of the violence of their enemies. What can man do against God? Not only the righteous and the wise in their works, but the unrighteous, the unwise, and the worst of their works are in the hand of God.